For years, Nevada's housing market has thrived on momentum. When confidence climbs, buyers rush in, investors take bigger risks, and sellers assume the next offer will always be higher. In 2026, that momentum is clearly fading. Homes are sitting longer, price reductions are common, buyers are negotiating harder, and sellers are losing control of the terms. Housing downturns rarely explode in one dramatic crash. More often, they unfold quietly. Listings linger. Sellers cut prices. Buyers wait for deeper discounts. Comparable sales reset lower. That pattern spreads from neighborhood to neighborhood until the broader market shifts from climbing to cooling. Today, we're counting down the 10 Nevada cities where that cooling is most visible in 2026. This isn't about calling these places bad. Many are desirable and may recover long-term. Let's start the countdown. Number 10, Mesquite. Mesquite is the type of town that seems so peaceful on the surface that you almost assume it's insulated from market chaos. Compared to Las Vegas, it moves at a slower rhythm. It's quieter, more relaxed, and frequently promoted as a retirement-friendly haven filled with sunshine, open space, and an easier pace of life. For years, that laid-back atmosphere gave buyers the impression that home values here would remain stable, largely because the market isn't fueled by the same high-stakes, emotionally charged energy that drives areas near the Strip. But in 2026, Mesquite is flashing a textbook warning sign. It's gradually becoming a discount-driven market, and once a market shifts into that mode, reversing course is rarely quick or easy. When a noticeable percentage of sellers begin accepting offers below their asking price, that's a clear signal that leverage has moved. Buyers recognize they have room to negotiate. They take their time, weigh options carefully, and push for incentives, knowing sellers are now competing with one another for attention. Another factor working against Mesquite is its reliance on discretionary buyers. Many people purchasing here are making lifestyle decisions. They're choosing when to retire, when to relocate for a slower chapter of life, or when to pick up a second home. These aren't urgent, must-move-now transactions. And when interest rates remain elevated or economic headlines feel shaky, discretionary buyers are usually the first to step back and wait. In a smaller market, that hesitation has an outsized impact. It doesn't take long for the buyer pool to shrink, and that's the hidden risk in Mesquite. The calm setting creates a sense of security, but calm markets can also mean limited liquidity. If you suddenly need to sell, you might discover there are fewer qualified buyers than you assumed, and the final price may fall short of your expectations. Number 9. Summerlin. Summerlin has long carried the reputation of being the safe side of Las Vegas. With its carefully master-planned neighborhoods, polished shopping centers, scenic parks, walking trails, and well-rated schools, it projects stability and prestige. The branding is strong, the streets are clean, and for years buyers operated under the assumption that demand here would always hold firm. During the boom cycle, homes in Summerlin were treated almost like protected assets. Buyers were comfortable paying a noticeable premium because they believed the zip code itself created a built-in safety net. The thinking was simple. Even if the broader market cooled, Summerlin would stand its ground. In 2026, however, the risk looks different. It's not that the area suddenly becomes unattractive, it's that it becomes negotiable. And when a high-end market shifts from commanding premiums to entertaining negotiations, the downturn doesn't show up as chaos. It unfolds subtly. Instead of dramatic price collapses, you see listings sitting longer than sellers anticipated. You notice modest price reductions at first, small adjustments that quietly repeat. Seller credits and buyer incentives begin to surface, gradually becoming standard rather than exceptional. There's also a harder reality at play in a higher rate environment. Premium home prices require premium monthly payments. When interest rates remain elevated, the number of buyers who can comfortably carry those payments shrinks. A tighter buyer pool leads to reduced liquidity. And when liquidity drops, sellers who need to move must compete more aggressively because fewer qualified buyers are in the game, and those buyers understand they hold leverage. On top of that, there's substitution within the valley itself. Someone considering Summerlin can easily compare it with other West Side neighborhoods, newer construction communities, or lifestyle-focused areas offering financial incentives. Builders, in particular, have an advantage. They can provide rate buydowns and closing cost credits that resale homeowners simply cannot replicate. That dynamic shifts the conversation from brand prestige to overall value. This is the Summerlin dilemma. A buyer pays a premium believing it provides insulation, but that protection only works if the next buyer is willing and able to pay the same premium under the same interest rate conditions. Number 8. Sparks. Sparks may be one of the brightest warning signals in northern Nevada right now. It sits squarely within the orbit of Reno, yet it operates with its own supply and demand pressures. For several years, it rode the same wave of momentum that lifted the entire region. Buyers eager to secure a spot near Reno moved quickly and decisively. Investors poured in, chasing rental demand. Sellers felt emboldened, pricing homes assertively because it seemed like there was always another buyer waiting in line. Fast forward to 2026, and the psychology has shifted. The urgency that once defined the market has cooled into patience. When buyers start believing that waiting could save them money, the emotional bidding wars disappear. Instead of reacting impulsively, they evaluate options carefully and negotiate with intention. In that kind of environment, it's the typical mid-range home that feels pressure first. Sparks is particularly exposed because buyers can comparison shop easily and at scale. They weigh Sparks against Reno. They compare resale homes to newer construction. They look at nearby communities offering similar commute times but different price points. In a softening market, homes are no longer treated like rare prizes. They're evaluated as inventory. And when buyers see inventory, they take their time. That's when listings begin to linger. And when homes linger, sellers are forced to respond. This is how a slowdown quietly turns into a reset. Control gradually shifts away from sellers and into the hands of buyers. Once buyers grow accustomed to having leverage, pricing dynamics change across the board. There's also an incentive challenge brewing. Builders and newer developments can offer rate buydowns, closing cost credits, or upgrade packages that effectively lower the cost of ownership without slashing headline prices. A resale seller simply doesn't have that flexibility. To compete, they often have to concede directly on price. So even if the market doesn't appear to be collapsing overnight, the true, effective value of homes is drifting downward in 2026. In Sparks, caution matters. If you're entering the market, it should be because the numbers clearly make sense. Number 7. North Las Vegas. North Las Vegas is typically where affordability strain shows up first, largely because this area relies heavily on buyers who need financing. When interest rates climb, the monthly mortgage payment becomes the ultimate filter, and that filter can quickly screen out a significant number of households. Even a modest increase in rates can price out thousands of potential buyers almost overnight. That's exactly why North Las Vegas serves as an early warning indicator in 2026. When the entry-level and mid-tier segments begin to soften, it often signals broader stress across the entire metro. If the most payment-sensitive buyers are stepping aside, the market as a whole starts losing momentum. It's like removing oxygen from the system. The energy fades fast. There's also a supply factor at play. Many homes in North Las Vegas fall within similar price ranges. In a hot market, that similarity barely matters because demand absorbs inventory quickly. But in a cooling cycle, comparable homes turn into direct competition. Buyers no longer feel rushed or pressured. They tour several properties, compare seller concessions, evaluate repair credits, and ultimately choose the option that produces the best monthly payment outcome. That behavior creates a ripple effect. Homes sit longer. Sellers reduce prices. Buyers notice and wait for deeper reductions. Comparable sales gradually trend downward, not with a dramatic crash headline, but through a steady series of small adjustments. This is how a housing market melts. It doesn't always snap in one defining moment. Instead, it softens deal by deal, negotiation by negotiation. Condition becomes another pressure point. In a cautious environment, buyers expect more value. They push for repairs, request credits, and scrutinize inspection reports carefully. Sellers who can't meet those expectations often compensate by lowering the price. When that happens repeatedly across multiple listings, the overall pricing tone shifts for the entire area. If you're considering buying in North Las Vegas in 2026, Your strongest safeguard is discipline. Avoid paying peak-era pricing. Expect negotiations to be part of the process. Number 6. Henderson. Henderson has long carried a polished reputation, and that image alone makes many buyers feel like it's a safer bet. The neighborhoods are well kept, the suburban atmosphere feels clean and established, and there's a sense of steadiness that contrasts with the faster-paced sections of the valley. During boom cycles, that strong brand identity helps Henderson command and defend higher prices. But in 2026, even Henderson isn't immune to the pull of a market that favors negotiation. Here's the reality about premium suburbs. When buyers grow cautious, the first behavior that disappears is overpaying. People don't necessarily stop purchasing homes altogether. What they stop doing is stretching beyond reason or paying inflated premiums for the exact same property while locking in a heavier monthly payment. There's also a structural challenge. Higher-end communities come with higher price tags, and higher price tags automatically shrink the pool of qualified buyers, especially in a high-rate environment. When financing costs stay elevated, affordability tightens. A smaller buyer pool translates directly into weaker liquidity. And when liquidity drops, sellers who need to move are forced to compete more aggressively, often through price reductions or meaningful concessions. That's how a premium market cools off. It doesn't happen because the city suddenly loses its appeal. It happens because pricing expectations were built during a period of peak confidence. Once that confidence fades, the market starts correcting anything that looks inflated. Overpricing gets exposed quickly. Henderson also faces strong internal competition within the valley. Buyers can compare options between Henderson, select parts of Las Vegas, and newer communities offering attractive builder incentives. If someone can achieve a similar lifestyle, similar schools, similar amenities, similar commute, but at a more favorable financial outcome elsewhere, Henderson sellers are forced to adjust. At that point, reputation takes a backseat to numbers. In 2026, Henderson isn't a place where you purchase based solely on brand prestige. You buy based on the strength of the deal. The full monthly obligation has to make practical sense, and comparable sales need to clearly justify the price. Number 5. Spring Valley. Spring Valley ranks here because it perfectly illustrates how a housing market can weaken quietly without ever triggering dramatic national headlines. It's positioned right inside the Las Vegas Valley, central enough to feel convenient, accessible enough to attract a broad range of buyers, and diverse enough to include everything from older neighborhoods to newer mid-tier developments. On the surface, that diversity suggests resilience. But in 2026, Spring Valley is dealing with a risky mix. Heavy substitution, strong sensitivity to interest rates, and inventory that can build up quickly when demand cools. This is an area where buyers have endless nearby options. If a property in Spring Valley feels overpriced, it takes only minutes to shift attention to another neighborhood, offering a comparable commute, similar amenities, and sometimes a better financial outcome. That dynamic erodes seller leverage almost immediately. Every listing becomes part of a value competition. And in a value-driven environment, average homes tend to lose negotiating power first. Spring Valley also depends heavily on finance buyers, which means mortgage rates effectively regulate demand. When monthly payments remain elevated, affordability tightens and the buyer pool contracts. The buyers who remain active behave differently. They're deliberate. They negotiate firmly. They ask for repair credits, closing cost assistance, and concessions. And when they sense weakness, they wait for the next reduction instead of submitting aggressive offers. That's how the slowdown unfolds. Homes linger on the market. Price cuts become routine rather than rare. Incentives quietly turn into the price of admission just to generate interest. Comparable sales begin edging downward, not in one dramatic collapse, but through a steady stream of negotiated transactions. It's a gradual reset that particularly impacts sellers who are still anchored to peak market expectations. The misconception in Spring Valley is assuming that a central location automatically guarantees protection. Location certainly helps, but it doesn't override affordability constraints, and it doesn't eliminate competition in a market full of alternatives. Number 4. Reno. Reno tends to confuse people because, on the surface, the narrative still sounds strong. There are jobs. There's population growth. The city has developed a more modern reputation, especially after benefiting from migration trends during the remote work surge. All of that is real. Reno absolutely has underlying strengths. But in 2026, the real question isn't whether Reno is a solid place to live. The issue is how its housing market behaves after a powerful run-up, especially once buyer psychology shifts. Reno experienced a sharp surge that effectively pulled future demand into the present. Many households purchased earlier than they originally intended. Investors entered the market assuming rents and property values would continue climbing. Sellers priced homes confidently, as if momentum were permanent. The problem is that momentum always cools eventually, and when it does, buyers become selective. Reno is also highly segmented. It's a collection of micromarkets rather than one uniform landscape. Some neighborhoods hold steady, others soften faster. That's typically how a downturn spreads, not everywhere at once, but in specific pockets first. Areas with more payment-sensitive buyers, higher inventory levels, or less distinctive housing stock begin to feel pressure. Over time, those softer pockets start pulling comparable sales lower across adjacent areas. One of Reno's biggest vulnerabilities right now is psychological. During boom years, buyers were driven by fear of missing out. In 2026, that fear has flipped. Now, the dominant concern is overpaying. And that subtle shift changes the entire tone of the market. When buyers fear overpaying, they hesitate. They negotiate harder. They ask for credits and repairs. They walk away from deals that don't feel financially justified. As that behavior becomes normal, listings remain active longer. Sellers then begin adjusting prices to catch up with the new reality. That gradual chasing the market process is how comparable sales reset, quietly and incrementally, without dramatic crash headlines. If you're purchasing in Reno in 2026, the strategy has to be hyper-local. You don't buy the city's reputation. You buy the specific submarket. You verify comparable sales. You secure concessions. You ensure the monthly payment fits comfortably within your budget. Number 3. Carson City. Carson City has long carried the reputation of being steady and insulated. As the state capital, it's often viewed as government-supported, smaller in scale, and less volatile than the tourism-driven swings of Las Vegas or the rapid growth narrative tied to Reno. Many buyers label it safe by default. But in 2026, a subtle yet important shift is underway. Seller dominance is weakening, and buyer leverage is becoming the norm. When transactions consistently close below asking price, that's a clear signal that sellers are competing for limited attention. And sustained competition typically applies downward pressure on values over time. Carson City also faces a depth issue. It doesn't have an unlimited stream of incoming buyers. So when inventory ticks up or demand cools even slightly, the balance can tilt quickly. Once that shift happens, sellers often have no choice but to trim prices or offer concessions just to secure a deal. This is where expectations can mislead people. Buyers move to Carson City assuming stability will shield them from market shifts. But calm doesn't mean immune. When conditions turn into a negotiation-driven environment, the experience changes. If you need to sell later, you may find longer days on market and discounting that feels surprisingly routine. There's also the substitution factor. Buyers aren't confined to Carson City alone. They can compare properties to options around Reno, nearby communities, or entirely different price tiers. And when alternatives exist, buyers use them as leverage. The transaction becomes less about what the seller hopes to achieve and more about what the buyer can secure elsewhere for similar money. Another 2026 pressure point is property condition and compliance. In smaller markets especially, buyers scrutinize deferred maintenance, aging roofs, older mechanical systems, and even insurance considerations more closely. The moment a home feels like extra work or added uncertainty, buyers push harder for discounts. They know they aren't battling multiple competing offers anymore. They're negotiating against the seller's timeline. If you're purchasing in Carson City this year, protection starts with price discipline. The safest deals are strong from the beginning, not justified by optimistic projections. Build in a cushion. Avoid chasing inflated numbers. Don't assume appreciation will fix a marginal purchase. Number 2. Las Vegas. Las Vegas sits at the center of Nevada's housing mindset. When Vegas is surging, optimism spreads statewide. When Vegas cools off, the chill is felt everywhere. And in 2026, the city is no longer operating at that breakneck bidding war pace. This is a market where timing matters again. Homes aren't vanishing within hours. Buyers are moving more deliberately. Sellers are offering credits and incentives to close deals. Those subtle shifts are the early framework of a correction cycle. Because once buyers recognize they have negotiating power, they begin exercising it consistently. There's also a comparable sales reset unfolding across the valley. Las Vegas is filled with homeowners who entered the market at very different moments. Some locked in ultra-low rates and built significant equity. Others purchased near peak pricing. And some bought recently at higher rates with heavier monthly obligations. In a slowing environment, it's the sellers who must move, whether due to job changes, financial strain, or timing, who end up setting the new benchmarks. They're the ones willing to cut prices to secure a contract. That's how the reset happens quietly. A few lower sales close. Buyers start pointing to those transactions as reference points. They request similar pricing. Sellers either adjust or watch their listings sit. Gradually, the overall tone of the market shifts downward. Las Vegas also carries investor influence. Investors are typically quicker to respond when the numbers change. If rental growth stalls, expenses climb, or demand softens, investor-owned properties can hit the market quickly. When that inventory appears during a period of cautious buyer behavior, supply expands at exactly the wrong time. Another factor in 2026 is that Las Vegas is no longer moving in unison. Some neighborhoods remain relatively stable, while others soften rapidly, particularly areas with clusters of similar homes, heavy new construction nearby, or a higher concentration of owners who need to sell. That uneven performance is precisely how a metro-wide correction spreads. Softer pockets generate lower comparable sales, and those comps influence negotiations everywhere else. This year, Las Vegas isn't a market to approach emotionally. It's not about buying into hype or headlines. It's about disciplined math. You purchase only when the numbers make sense, when concessions provide protection, and when you're prepared for continued adjustment. Number 1. Boulder City. Boulder City claims the top position because it reflects the most subtle and potentially dangerous type of housing downturn in 2026. This isn't about a dramatic crash splashed across headlines. It's about a quiet breakdown in liquidity that can leave sellers stuck and buyers caught off guard. Boulder City has always marketed a certain promise: peaceful neighborhoods, tightly preserved community character, and a slower, more relaxed pace than Las Vegas. With its proximity to Lake Mead and the Hoover Dam corridor, it feels tucked away and insulated from broader market swings. But that sense of insulation is exactly where the risk lives. In 2026, Boulder City operates as a thin market. The buyer pool is limited, and limited pools react sharply when borrowing costs remain elevated. It doesn't take a dramatic drop in demand to create pressure. Even a modest slowdown can turn what would have been a routine listing into a stagnant one. Sellers accustomed to immediate interest are now experiencing fewer showings, longer decision timelines, and offers filled with contingencies. Buyers understand the leverage. They request repair credits, push for price adjustments, and negotiate assertively because they know there may not be another competing offer waiting in line. There's also a premium expectation problem. Many homeowners price their properties as if the town's reputation alone should safeguard value. But right now, buyers aren't paying for atmosphere. They're evaluating monthly payment reality. If the payment feels stretched, they compare aggressively. They weigh Boulder City against newer construction elsewhere, against other parts of the valley, and even against extending a rental situation. If the numbers don't align, they simply wait. Here, the downturn spreads quietly through time rather than panic. Days on market increase. Price reductions multiply. One motivated seller closes below expectations, and that sale resets the benchmark. The next listing adjusts accordingly. Buyers grow even more patient. In a small town, just a handful of discounted closings can shift comparable sales faster than most residents anticipate. Discretionary demand adds another layer of vulnerability. Boulder City attracts lifestyle-driven buyers and retirees. groups that can easily postpone decisions when economic headlines feel uncertain. When discretionary buyers step back in a thin market, the slowdown is immediate and visible. Nevada as a whole still has growth potential, employment opportunities, and long-term appeal. But the housing environment in 2026 is running on different fuel than it did during the surge years. Buyer leverage is expanding. Negotiation is standard practice. Across multiple Nevada cities, the warning signs appear in the form of price cuts, rising concessions, and fading seller control.